I'll possibly share with you a bit of you know the material around how infrequent products work. And I don't think ice theory as a whole is a long is a long one. Indeed, I don't think we have the time to cover it. So what I'm going to do is possibly focus on eye of ice theory, give you a bit of perspective around ice theory, and just go around the eye of ice theory. Everyone knows that infrequent products are basically those like property purchase and car purchase, travel, medical. And if you actually think about it, there are a ton of infrequent products that we actually buy. You don't buy a Kindle every day. You buy Kindle once in a while. And Eventbrite is something that you don't go every day. Bose, again, you don't go every you go. I mean, when I was actually writing this, and that's when I realized the amount of impact that you have on infrequent products on a day-to-day life. I gave my overview already: PropertyGuru, PayPal, TurboTax. Besides that, I was also running an alumni education platform alumni networking platform for educational institutions. That was a bit of infrequent product as well. But just getting into the deep of things, the real problem that you find with infrequent products, it's pretty hard to manage. You have a weak recall now that you're not going to be a part of the system. Like, for instance, one of the things that we struggled in TurboTax is, okay, this guy came and filed taxes and he left. I'm going to see him next year. How do I stay top of mind so that he comes back to me next time? So the other thing is also ensuring viability is a challenge. So, and Andrew Shen had this had this really nice blog post. This was written way back, but he said dating platforms don't get funded because the LTVs to CAC, matching that is pretty hard. They come once in a lifetime, and maybe they'll renew their subscription twice or thrice. So how do you then match this with their CAC is a big question. And the third thing is, given that transactional products, your valuation is largely subject to margins. So how do you drive margins, especially when you're going to spend a volume in terms of acquisition, or you have problems with monetization and increasing the LTV of the customers? So so low frequency products don't appeal to everyone in the market. So one of the things that I talk about is that if you see, there are two traits of low frequency products, which is basically they're not applicable to everyone at any time. So if you're looking for a job, example, or a house or a dating, not that your friend will be also dating, or they'll be looking for a house, or they'll be looking for a job as well. So the core of the referral loop or the viral loop that essentially exists with respect to the other side of the products, which is the entertainment products, the social networking products, that is largely not applicable here. The frequency products largely work on some kind of a referral loop or viral loop. Here, word of mouth does exist, but the rest of them are very difficult because it's not very penetrable in the market. So if you look at it, the infrequency is essentially a spectrum. You're talking about Zillow on one side, which is on high infrequency, Expedia on a low infrequency. So this happens probably once in 8 years or 10 years in the market. Expedia could be once in 3 months, 6 months in a market. So for the context of this theory, what we've defined as anything infrequent is something that it's happening less than once in 3 months, because that I feel is the window where it's forgettable zone. It could be also argued that anything less than a month is also could be treated that way. The other thing is about creating opacity. Like, I have the same problem with PropTech, and the dating sites also have the same thing, which is when you go out on a date, you really don't know what's happening on the date. And no matter what's your best-in-class ML algorithm in terms of recommendation engine, without knowing what's really transferring in the outside world, it's difficult for you to tweak your algorithms to serve them better. So if you're looking at the control of experience, there are products like TurboTax, which has got complete control over experience, versus Indeed, where you don't have any, apart from discovering job, you really don't know how the job interview transpired, how the candidate experience was. All of these things happen outside of the platform. Yeah, let me know if I'm talking a bit too fast. If you want me to reduce the speed, I'm happy to do that. Katrina,
this is great. Now we're getting like a little workshop here on it. So I love it.
All right, cool. So look, I think this is a bit of, if you were to look at it and across three platforms, like for instance, if you're looking at complete closure of transactions, there are things like TurboTax, which is a SaaS product. You have Open Door, which is a marketplace. You've got eBay, which is an e-commerce, or Allbirds, which is an e-commerce. PayPal, which is on fintech. All of these things have complete experience. But on the other spectrum, you see dating sites like Match, which doesn't have complete experience. Your SaaS tools like Shutterstock, which you, assuming that you're a consumer, not the agency, you go once in a while. You're not using Shutterstock every day in your life, possibly when you're making presentations and what have you. And similarly, things like Skyscanner, where again, you do some kind of a retailing, but a lot of the experience actually happens outside of the platform. That's kind of the lay of the land for you as to how different products are there in the market. So the third dimension of this is, we talked about I, which is infrequency, C is control over experience, and the third is engagement. The more infrequent you are, the better it is, the more important it is for you to focus on engagement. Because if you don't focus on engagement, it may result in poor recall, poor retention, and hardly any word of mouth. So later in the engagement section, you would hear me talk about, basically in the article also I would have covered that there are two types of products, especially in the engagement world. So there is one with a predictable retention where you know that people are going to come back. So if Mike is a TurboTax customer, I'm pretty sure that he's going to come back next year, or at least I know that he's going to file taxes next year. So there's a bit of predictability on retention. Whereas when you're looking at a job, it is very hard for me to say when Mike is going to start looking out for his job, right? So that's kind of the two worlds. And it's important that you employ the right strategy to bring them back. If there's a predictable retention, how do you bring them back? If there is a non-predictable retention, then what are the other strategies you employ to get more word of mouth for your product? So again, so if you were to look at this, there is this spectrum of high engagement, which is when you're buying a car, you're more involved. When you're choosing a vacation on Airbnb, you're more involved. Versus when I'm sending money, I'm not that engaged, right? I'm just sending this. It's kind of no-brainer for me. So engagement by itself for infrequent products has three dimensions, which is complexity. So Zillow is extremely complex. PayPal is simple. I call this thing called touch. Touch is basically how much is the product in constant touch with you, because then it reinforces the experience. So example, TripAdvisor is something that you visit only when you're traveling, whereas where you buy something from Stitch Fix, you wear it every time you wear it and someone compliments you, that is getting reinforced on you again and again, unlike TripAdvisor, which is touch and go. And the third one is a bit of predictability of retention, which I spoke about. Indeed is unpredictable. TurboTax is much more predictable. So if you know that complexity is a spectrum, then how do you look about this? So the point here is, the higher the complexity, the more you need engagement. So example, categories like property, dating, and car, where there's a high involvement, you need, whereas there's a degree of complexity, you need a higher degree of engagement. So in the second part of the article, you would find that there are some strategies illustrated. We'll not get into the deep depth of it. Some of these things will be covered as part of the Reforge course, but you will see me tease around how do you then look at high involvement products, especially, and how do you then dial up the engagement there. So yeah, so there are products like single touch to constant touch, which I spoke about. Again, like if you're looking at Bose, and every time you're hearing this music from Bose and it's just delighting you, or although you buy Bose once in a while, the question is, how can you move towards constant touch? And that's something that we illustrate later in the ICE theory as to how do you move from single to constant touch. Similarly, Nike, let's say you're wearing these shoes for running and you're liking this as you do your sports or running, and then that's another way of constant reinforcement of the brand there. Yeah, the last thing is about predictability of retention, and so highly infrequent product. So if you're a better.com, and if you're not familiar with better.com, that's basically one of the they are a mortgage refinancing platform or financing platform, to put it. And there it's again, there's a degree of unpredictability as to when someone, let's Katrina, is going to mortgage or remortgage a home. So the higher the infrequency and the retention is unpredictable, that's something that you need to go out and solve for. That's a big problem, and you need to find a way to manage that. So just some bit of clarification before I go down this further, right? So there are too many concepts here, so I just wanted to put that home. So when a customer comes in from here to point X, then that's the customer lifetime value. Meaning, let's say a person is coming to file a tax with TurboTax over 5 times. So 5 into whatever time, money that they're paying, that becomes a customer lifetime value. And this concept of making sure that they come every time, every year to pay the taxes for you is what I call as the lifetime retention. Because the concept of retention is very ill-defined with the infrequent products. So I've just taken the liberty of giving some nomenclatures around how this works. Then every time when you're coming in to do your taxes, let's say it takes you 10 sessions to do your taxes, that 10 sessions is what you call as active retention. So you might just drop off after doing the first 2 sessions. So how do I bring you back to ensure that you're culminating the transaction this time is what I call as active retention. And the frequency is times when you come to the product, especially to do possibly how many times you're coming to the product, not just for doing the core transaction, but it could be something else. So for instance, one of the things that we've always dabbled in TurboTax is, can we help people with their financial planning? That's one of the things that we've been trying to do. And so let's say this guy is coming in so many other times to do financial planning. That's a frequency we're talking about. So there's frequency, there's lifetime retention, there's active retention, all of them helping us to improve the customer lifetime value. And the last thing is about distinctive. When we were researching for this, what's incredible is Airbnb, which is very distinctive, has almost like 70% of their traffic, which is organic traffic. That's incredible position to be. Whereas Expedia has close to around 42%, sometimes in hot market even further, which is just paid traffic. I mean, that gives you a comparison about how much one needs to acquire a traffic for the brand in the same space. Yeah, and Airbnb, given its distinctiveness, is able to attract a lot of traffic organically. So I think distinctive for me, one of the examples that comes to mind in terms of high in frequencies, Reforge. They've done a pretty good job. I don't know if Guillermo or Katrina are part of Reforge right now, but I think they've done an incredible job of turning around a non-frequent product like education, which Coursera and Udacity, and they're still in that format, to something of a subscription-based format. And they've also laid in a whole bunch of use cases which makes them distinctive. Like, for instance, what they are good for is that they bring in all the industry experts, the BPO growth of Instacart or Instagram. They're all writing on Reforge, and that makes you much more distinctive against other platforms. And which means definitely there's a cost of acquisition and other benefits that they will be enjoying. So that's kind of basically the ICE framework. Yeah, so there's infrequency, there's control over experience, there's engagement, and there's distinctiveness. All of them together, what I call is the ICE theory. And ICE theory is complex. I mean, if you look at it, there's a whole bunch of strategies that underpins each one of these things that I've said. But today we're going to largely focus on infrequency right there. So one interesting point is this guy, Richard Barton, that you're seeing on the screen, is the one who is kind of a pioneer in terms of doing these products, be it Expedia, be it Zillow right now, or for that matter, Glassdoor. So the cue of making an infrequent product much more frequent was taken from him. And so he has got a lot to play with some of the thinking that is underpinning the next few slides. So yeah, so then if these are the 4 dimensions, what's our strategy? The strategies go from left to right. So infrequent to frequent, no control over experience to control over experience. If there's a low engagement, go towards high engagement. If you're non-distinctive, go towards much more distinctive approach. So one thing I want to drive home before we go forward is that this is how you measure retention for product market fit for your frequent products. So let's say your Instagram, you have a low product market fit, you do a bunch of fixes, the retention improves, that becomes medium, and then eventually becomes high. That's how your product market fit is looked at. Whereas for infrequent products, it's about penetration. So if you have low penetration, then look at medium penetration and high penetration. So I think I've shared the first blog of mine is out. And there I've given a framework as to how to think about product market fit and draw a line in the sand. And I think another issue that I have with the product industry is also that we have too many notional concepts like 10x, MVP, product market fit, and different people have different notions of what that really means. I'm very uncomfortable with this. And for me, if that term is getting floated around a bit, I mean, if it's a part of our everyday language, then it's important that you have some kind of definition. So feel free to check out my blog where I've got low frequency products.substack, where I've got a method by which we can draw a line in the sand for infrequent products, product market fit. And so the key call out here is that be largely focusing on penetration as against retention. So the more market you penetrate, the more you are going to be enjoying product market fit. So ICE theory can be used in conjunction with growth loops, and it kind of falls in a place where after you have done your market penetration, which is your product market fit, when you want to grow your product to the next level, that's where ICE theory is actually applicable. And there are three other things I want to bring. There's actually a fourth one as well, but there are three things, and the theory is also evolving as I write. So there are a couple of factors that you will see with infrequent products. So infrequent products, some of them are very macro factor resilient versus non-resilient. For instance, jobs is very closely tied to the economy. If economy tanks for whatever reason, your job as a category is going to have an impact. Similar to property, similar to cars. So there is a strong relation between macroeconomic factors and infrequent products. Penetrable versus non-penetrable, I spoke about this earlier. Impulsive versus deliberate, like sending a money in PayPal is super impulsive, versus deliberate is when you want to buy a car, you're going to be super deliberate about this. So infrequent products, given its high ticket item or infrequency, generally have the nature of being much more deliberate about this. So in the later part of the section, I argue as to how you should define the difficult decision making, because you can't make it any. I mean, I don't think you can make a property purchase simpler. It is a high involvement purchase, and it needs to be. But the question is, how can you aid the decision making during the process? Is what I will detail on later. The one other aspect you're not seeing here, which is there, is also seasonal versus non-seasonal. Some of them, like if you see property itself, there are times when you don't see property being actively pursued. Like let's say in countries like Indonesia, during the time of Ramadan, you'll not see that there are too many property purchases happening. So it goes on a low. And then there's the non-seasonal aspect where it comes up. And TurboTax, for instance, again, it's a great example. Tax is just a season. Tax doesn't happen perpetually. So we all wait for the tax season. And then once the tax season comes through, then you're pretty much on the peak and then you retract. So that's again a characteristic of the infrequent product. So let's look at this, the degree of infrequency. Mindful of time, I'm going to just wrap this up at the earliest. The degree of infrequency, again, just reminding everyone, we have different spectrum of infrequency. We have high infrequency on one side. We've got low infrequency with Expedia. So how do we manage this? The pitfalls of this is the more infrequent the product is, the lesser the recollection is. And that's a problem. If the rest of the recollection, the question is you're going to pay a ton to hire them back, which then impacts your bottom line. And also the question is also how do you then monetize them effectively? What's the LTV looking like? So to then counter the problem, the strategy is to move from infrequent to frequent. And if we do that, what you see is that it increases the penetrability in the market. The number of people who will be then relevant for the product kind of increases. So how do we then go from infrequency to frequency? So I'll just pause here. Any questions, any thoughts so far before I deep dive into the strategies? Anybody?
I mean, this is incredible. I'm just digesting it, but I'm sure we'll have some questions here in a little bit from Katrina. So
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Katrina.
I love this, and I am new to an infrequent product, just having joined Apartment List, and so I really love this framework. The thing that I was thinking as you were speaking was there is difference in some way the density of the audience. So if you think about, like, if I'm looking for a job, it's possible that my colleagues are not looking for a job. But maybe if I'm dating, if I'm in the age of life where I'm dating, maybe a lot of my friends will be dating at the same time. And so there's kind of a virality around the density of kind of the audience. If I am in college and then I'm looking for an apartment, or if I'm in college and I'm looking for a job, I have a lot of people around me who are doing that. And so that does feel like the strategy, there's a strategy element to density of audience, or maybe you call it something else because you already have density, I think, in other places. That seems, is really sticking out to me in terms of just looking at the examples that you're going through.
That's a great point, Katrina. And actually, I cover that a bit in the engagement side of things. But yeah, that's and engagement is where I deep dive into the word of mouth aspect, a bit of virality that is very specific for infrequent products. But your point is very valid. There are some products which naturally have the density and some that doesn't. So yeah, I'm just going to jump into the strategies. I'm going to quickly walk you through 3 strategies, and then I'll open it up for more questions and discussions as we go along. And interestingly, the first one I'm talking about is what Katrina just pointed out. So the first concept is all about moving to timing known and easy to influence. So that's kind of the matrix that I work with. So if you were to look at most products that we operate on have easy to influence. They're either hard to influence or easy to influence, and the timing of transaction is known or unknown. So for instance, it is very difficult for you to know when someone is going to buy a property, when someone is going to be out for dating, when someone is going to look for a job. It's also hard to influence that. I can't go out and start persuading, let's say, Joe, hey, Joe, start looking for a job right now. I mean, he might be perfectly satisfied and is not going to yield to that request. So the timing of transaction of when Joe is going to be available in the market is unknown, and it will be hard to influence them in certain particular categories, right? And then if you see on the right-hand side, there are easy to influence, and there's also a bit of timing of transaction known. So for instance, if I take travel, I can, if you're a regular traveler, to a certain degree of extent, I can predict, Guillermo is going to travel here in July. I kind of know that that's usually when he takes his vacation. And it's easy to influence because then I can send him a notification on deals or upcoming packages or whatever that is, which can help him. So if you look at the spectrum, there are different products in different buckets. And your strategy as a product person is then to move from anything on the left-hand side to the right-hand side, right? If you can transition from left-hand side of the equation where it's hard to influence too easy to influence, then you are kind of making the game even more easier. Or better yet, if you can go from quadrant 4 to quadrant 1, where your timing of transaction is known, and if it's easy to influence, it's far, far better to be in a place there. So a live example of that is just Katrina just pointed about jobs. So LinkedIn, for instance, is a case study. If you were to look at it, that was a bunch of member profiles. They were just a job site, which was pretty hard to influence. From there, they transitioned into what you call as this user-generated content. And now it is for me far more easier to influence the consumers to both post something, and my timing of transaction is known. They might pretty much know that, Vivek has timed his post at Monday 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. That's kind of his time when he actually goes for a post. So it's kind of easy to influence, and timing of transaction is also a bit more known. So that's one strategy that you could employ actually when you migrate from left to right. The second thing is about focusing on the gap of interaction by introducing use cases. So one of the things that you might also want to look out is I also give you how easy it is to move from left to right. So this one is a hard one, although it's easy on the slides to say that go from left-hand side to the right-hand side. It takes a bit of trial and error for you to move really on this side. Then the next strategy that we're looking at also is adding use cases to reduce the gap of transaction or increase the frequency. Again, this is I would say this is hard and medium to actually execute. So Zillow's Zestimate is a great example of this. So what they've done is if the purchase of property is very infrequent, they stay top of mind by ensuring this estimate is there with you. This is kind of a known case. So every quarter, possibly, if you engage with it, you know what your housing value is. The other thing that you see is also Airbnb during the pandemic actually introduced the Airbnb online experiences, which is another great asset. So instead of you doing the actual travel, in between that, you can have passive experiences across the world sitting in your couch through Airbnb online experiences. So one other way is actually adding adjacent use cases. The third one is what I call as latch on to a product, habit product, or layer a habit product. So if you talk about travel, which is extremely infrequent, I think that it's an ingenious stuff that they've done with tying up with a credit card, which is a habitual product. So when you kind of bind your travel with a credit card, every time you collect miles, every month when you're looking at your miles, you kind of getting reinforced on your travel plans. And that's a brilliant way for you to go towards the frequency as well. Another way is to, I don't know if you guys have heard about this Prof G's brand model. And I liked what he talked about, which is basically he talks as a clock model in branding. And he talks about pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase. And as a company or a product person, you decide where you want to dial up your product's experience, whether you want it to be in the post-purchase segment, you want to do it in the pre-purchase segment, and that gives you an ability to move towards infrequency. So if you add use cases, keeping the clock model in mind, it can help you navigate into frequency. So let's look at an example. Peloton is a great example in the post-purchase segment. Now, what was just a one-time buy of your fitness equipment suddenly becomes a constant touch product where you're frequently engaging with the product with the on-demand training. And so what they did is they dialed up the post-purchase aspect of your purchase of your product. And I think that's worked really well for them. If you look at the numbers, the monthly workouts has been increasing, quarterly revenue has been increasing. Although the caveat here is that there's a bit of pandemic's role in that. You see the skyscrapers actually picking up after the pandemic. But nonetheless, I think that's a brilliant strategy to pursue, because now you're deliberately focusing on a fitness equipment now that has been transformed into something much more frequent product out there. A Peloton is a great case of constant touch, control over experience, and moving into frequency. There's another case which I talk about, pre-purchase product. In Indian jewelry is, I don't know how many of you know about this. India has a bit of, South India especially has a bit of fascination towards gold jewelry. So what they do is they go into this jeweler, and the jeweler has a different kind of scheme. So he'll say that, look, you can pay me 5,000 bucks INR, Indian rupees per month for the next 11 months. So, and the 12th month, I'm going to put in the same amount that you're giving me, which is, let's say I'm going to put in 5,000. So end of the year, you've got 6,000 bucks to go out and purchase your jewelry, which is a fairly decent amount to look at. Or this could be in dollars, in Singapore, this is 5,000 per month, right? That lands up to 550,000 INR. So 600,000 INR, which is a pretty decent amount for you to purchase the jewelry ending 1 year. And so that's again an infrequent product, but customers are kind of habituated to this on a monthly payment schedule. It's kind of a, kind of inverse subscription, if you will. And that's working really well. That model has been working really well. So just sum it up, 3 strategies for you to move from frequency to infrequency. Timing should be much more known, and you should be able to influence, add an adjacent use case. And the third one is, this is an error. You need to latch onto a habit product or layer a habit product. And also the question is, when do you do this? When you're requiring next level of growth, like LinkedIn moved from jobs to UGC when they were actually looking for next level of growth. Adding adjacent use cases when you find that the hiatus between your visits are too long and you want to plug in something in between. And the third one is when you want to layer the habit aspect or latch onto a habit product will happen when you want to bump up your average revenue per user. That's kind of the time when you want to bring in this. Well, I think I've taken a lot of time already, so we've got 7 minutes and I'll stop here for questions.